Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. I came here to work with the Crossroads Women's Center, which has just bought some big premises and it's just starting anew, and it's a very exciting launch for us, and it was an opportunity to also come here and speak with you. So it's really good. I think everybody realizes this is a very important moment in history with the election, not only for you all here in the US, but for the whole world. We feel it even though we can't vote. So, we feel people are reconsidering their position and reconsidering their activism and the need to be organizing and the need to be standing up, for civil rights and against racism and for human rights and all the things, against sexism and all the things that we believe in. And sex workers are part of that picture. The sex worker movement is often not considered, and it really needs to be, because it's very connected, apart from the fact that all the movements need to be considered, it's very connected to the movement against poverty. Sex work, prostitution is really a survival tactic, and it has to be looked at in that way. All over the world, I'm originally from Argentina, the International Prostitutes Collective, which both the ECP and us pros are part of, works with sex worker organizations and individuals in a wide number of countries. We work very closely with Empower from Thailand, who I understand, where is the sister who introduced me here, has been there, which is a fantastic organization. We work with people in Ireland, in India, in Peru, all over the world. And wherever you are, you find out a very similar situation. First of all, the sex workers are overwhelmingly women, are overwhelmingly mothers, and generally single mothers. And that is the situation. And if you look, for example, we were organizing with the women in Thailand, and we had long discussions about what are the choices that women face. And they said, you know what? If I do any other job, and most of them before they were sex workers had done a number of jobs, I can earn twice in the worst paid sex worker job than I would get in any of the other jobs that I did before. And so, to me, it's what is not often referred to as a no-brainer. I hate the expression because it's a bit horrible. But the fact is, that's what you're faced with. A lot of women come from the countryside. A lot of women are supporting families back on the land and are sending money to their kids and their mothers, right, the grandmothers who are looking after the kids, and really supporting entire families and communities. And to do that out of what you earn as a sweatshop worker, or somebody who works in a fishery, which is very low paid, very hard work, very, very exploitative, you're much better off in sex work. It doesn't mean that sex work is great. Nobody is suggesting that it is, but you have to look at sex work in context. And often we find that that's just what's missing. It's like there's a category of prostitution is uniquely degrading, and everything else somehow is not. Well, let me tell you, if you're cleaning toilets 14 hours a day, it's uniquely degrading. And if you're working in a fishery where you're in frozen water, up to here, and it's very painful, and you're getting very low wages, you feel that it's uniquely degrading. So we just have to see prostitution in the context of what our options are. As Rachel mentioned, we are campaigning against women's poverty. Poverty generally, but we start with women. Because when women have money, the whole family survives. When men have money, they don't necessarily. Any number of other things happen to that money. But women generally make sure that their kids survive, are doing well, etc. Women are the primary caregivers, and that is the situation internationally. So Thailand was pointing out to us what their choices were, In the UK, for example, now, prostitution, physical prostitution has gone up quite a lot. In certain areas, it's up 60%. You know, women who are working on the street, which is the worst place to be working in because it's more dangerous. You're much more open to being criminalized, etc., arrested, etc. And the reason is very simple. They're dismantling the welfare state. They've been introducing sanctions on your benefits, very similar to here. You don't turn up for an appointment or you do this or that wrong. They just cut your welfare. They've also taken away grants for students. So there are a lot of students now who are working in prostitution in order to support their studies. You know, it has become very common online or whatever. So it's always an issue of economic need. And that's how we have to look at it. Now, I'd like to give you a little history. In 1975, of kind of the sex worker, the modern sex worker movement, if you like. In 1975, sex workers, women sex workers in France went on strike. They occupied the church in the city of Lyon. I don't know if any of you is familiar with this history. And it then spread all over France. It was just fantastic. And they had a banner outside their church that said, "Our children don't want their mothers in prison." And they told the police and all these supposedly well-meaning organizations, "Don't worry about the pimps, we can manage those. Worry about getting the police off our backs and about doing something about violent men when we report them. Because right now, we are getting killed, the police are doing nothing about it, and instead they arrest us. So worry about the things that we tell you we want you to worry about, as opposed to decide what the agenda is for us." It was a fantastic strike. It got a lot of support. And the English Collective of Prostitutes came out of that, and in fact, even the name came out of that, because they were called the French Prostitutes Collective, and so we adopted that name. And from then on, we have been organizing, and then other organizations came out in a number of countries, many of them inspired by what we were doing. Now, in 1982, very much following that example, we in London occupied a church very close to the Women's Center where we were based, and we're in there for 12 days. And we were protesting against police illegality and racism because the police were particularly targeting black sex workers, were arresting women when they were not working. If you lived in the area, every time they saw you, they thought, "Oh, well, we just pick her up." And by and large, women pleaded guilty to loitering and soliciting, whatever you call it here, it's very similar. So that you had a criminal record, whether or not you were working at the time of your arrest. And they have a system of cautions as well, so that once you were known as a prostitute, they just put a caution on you. You know, you were a common prostitute, so-called. Anyway, it was a really turning point event, because for the first time, people considered what was happening to sex workers and the fact that they had to take a position about it. You know, people knew, because there had been riots, for example, in some of the black inner city areas where black people had protested about police racism, so people were familiar with that. But they had never considered that this was something that they should take a position on. And that if they were against police racism in relation to black people, they should be against police racism and sexism in relation to sex workers, many of whom also happen to be black. So it was a big turning point, and we learned a lot from it. The whole legal service based at our Women's Center came out of that, and has been going ever since. Now, 10 years ago in England, 5 women, sex workers who worked on the street, 4 of them I think were mothers, were killed in a city called Ipswich. I don't know if any of you has heard about that. And a man was eventually caught, etc. And for the first time, in the kind of outcry that ensued, there was a lot more support from the public and even from the media, a lot of it as a result of these many years of campaigning. There was more support rather than, oh, you know what, it's 5 prostitutes. All of a sudden, people were aware that these were 5 women who had had various difficulties in their lives, who had children, and who needed support and didn't get it. And again, the Ipswich murders was kind of a turning point. We organized what we call the Safety First Coalition, which we coordinated. The English Collective of Prostitutes did that. And we brought together a whole set of organizations, like the Royal College of Nursing, which is why I was particularly glad to be speaking here today, who were ready to support our call for decriminalization. Because they understood that if you have a vulnerable worker out on the street or in premises, and I'll tell you just one thing about working indoors, is that you're only allowed to work if it's one person. If there's 2 of you working together, it's a brothel and therefore illegal. So that the law is actually set up in such a way that you're in a vulnerable position if you work legally. Otherwise, you open yourself to arrest, and they have raids very regularly. And they have increased the penalties, you know, for brothel keeping. So it's very problematic. So a whole set of organizations, starting with the Royal College of Nursing, came in to support our call for decriminalization. There was Women Against Rape, there were some vicars from Ipswich as well as other cities, and they said, we want sex workers to be able to come forward to access services without having to worry that they are themselves going to be labeled or criminalized in some way. And that is our priority, and that's why we support your campaign. And they have supported us ever since. They've been very wonderful, really. So that was the Safety First Coalition. Now, New Zealand, I don't know how many people have heard this, but New Zealand has decriminalized prostitution, I think it's about 6 years ago. They had a big campaign. Again, they brought together a whole coalition of people, and they managed to get the law passed by 1 vote. You know, it was very close. But, and it was led, the coalition was led by the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective, which is again a very strong organization. And it has made a huge difference, and they all tell you that. The government has ordered various investigations to see how decriminalization has worked. They have found that prostitution has not increased. They have found that safety has increased because sex workers are more able to come forward when there's violence. They are more able to refuse clients that they don't want, because again, they can work in small collectives as well as bigger institutions. If it's a bigger institution, you have to be registered. But if it's a smaller collective, you do not. So the brothels know very well that if the conditions there are no good, the women can set themselves up in their own premises and don't have to be dependent on them. And that has definitely helped. And they just feel that in terms of health and safety, it has been really helpful. We have been using New Zealand as a model. I think people are aware that there was a Supreme Court decision in Canada in favor of decriminalization, which unfortunately the government then ignored and decided to pass some other legislation. So there's we're still campaigning there. But the New Zealand model is being used all over the world. And we're really hoping that something will happen here in the US as well, as Rachel was saying. Now, we had a symposium in London last year where we brought together about 10 different organizations from 10 different countries to speak about their situation and why they were campaigning for decriminalization. And we got a whole set of academics who had done research about the situation of sex workers, poverty, etc., to also speak about why they were supporting decriminalization. And that's going to be published very soon. But it was a fantastic occasion, and there was absolute consensus that decriminalization is the way to go. It's not the only thing. You know, we want mothers, for example, and other carers to have a living wage so that we don't end up having to go into prostitution in order to support our families. We're campaigning for that with a whole set of other organizations. But whatever the situation is, being criminalized does not help you. It just puts you in a much weaker position, and you become a target of, first of all, of the police. And I think with Black Lives Matter now, I think people are aware of who the police are. And you know, they're not nice to sex workers. You know, I mean, it's not only black people that are getting killed. You know, they take advantage of sex workers in all kinds of ways. They go for free sex. You know, they blackmail you in all kinds of ways. They say, you know, they're going to tell your family if you don't do what they want. And they're very racist in their implementation of the prostitution laws, and I think Rachel can tell you something about that. Because if you're black, you're much more likely to be arrested than if you're not. So there are any number of problems with increasing police powers, which criminalization does. So that's, yeah, that's kind of where we're at. I think I'll leave it at that. Take your questions.